is amazing to speak with someone who had the great chance to be up there in space. So can you, for our viewers here in Bosnia, in Europe, explain what is to be out there and be an astronaut and feel all that what you can feel only up there in space?
Esmir, I think it's two things at once. The first is it's a deeply personal experience to be able to cross all of Europe in about 4 minutes, to be able to go around the entire world in an hour and a half. You know, in the time it takes to eat dinner at a restaurant, you can go around the entire planet. And to see the world that way, to see 16 sunrises a day, it's immensely personal. The world changes in your mind. It becomes one place, one shared place. So I think that's an important perspective that comes from it. The other is that this is the next sort of step of human exploration of the universe around us. From the first of us that came out of the Rift Valley in Africa, whatever, 300,000 years ago, started coming into Europe, maybe, I don't know, 50 or 60, 70,000 years ago. We have slowly explored. We've taken the best of our technology, whether it's fire or the wheel or our ability to make machinery or the printing press. We've taken the best of our mental ability and applied it to allow us to explore and live in ever further remote places. And 100 years ago, we started living in Antarctica. Just over 50 years ago, we left Earth for the first time. And 17 years ago, we started living together as a species on the International Space Station. And being part of that 100,000 year continuum of human exploration, now actually leaving the planet, starting to understand the rest of everything else, but much more clearly understanding the Earth itself. To me, that is the other really important part of what we're doing on board spaceships. And together, the personal and the professional make it an amazing adventure to be part of.
You have just mentioned that technological and exploration, and you started your journey in 1992 and you finished it in 2010s. How do you feel that technological advancement of the world in that time from 1992 to 2017 today?
Oh, there have been significant changes. Spaceflight got far safer. When I first flew back in the early 1990s, the space shuttle was still fairly new, and international cooperation was still very limited. Since then, we had several near misses with the space shuttle and the accident on Columbia, which forced us to really evaluate what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right. And we improved spaceship design. And then other spaceships have come along. The Soyuz, the Russian ship, has gone from being an old analog ship to being partially analog digital to now being a very sophisticated digital ship. And there are companies like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic that have put little spaceships suborbital, and SpaceX has put many, many satellites into orbit, and in fact has invented a whole new type of rocket technology that not only launches a rocket, but then that rocket comes back and lands, and they've successfully landed it 18 times. So, and we're not finished yet. You know, we're still inventing and moving forwards. And so we've gone from the early stages of space exploration to permanent settlement in orbit on board the space station, and new and ever improving rocket designs and access to space. It's a pretty exciting time when you start thinking about all the things we could do next.
When you went up there, you did so many experiments. You have reported on them through interviews and through TV. How important that explorations and experiments are up there, and what we are learning from them, from people like you who are working on them?
Well, fundamentally, it teaches us about the Earth and about ourselves. When you take away one significant variable, like gravity, you can study things in a way that you can't study them on the surface of the Earth. Whether you're studying, say, the behavior of water, any fluid, when you take away gravity, suddenly you don't have the push down from the top. So you can study surface tension, you can study capillary flow, you can study the Marangoni effect. There's all sorts of fluid physics experiments. When you light a candle in space, it behaves completely differently than one on Earth. And so we study flame and flame propagation. We study human physiology, their balance system, the bone generation system, the cardiovascular system. So it's a great laboratory to study human health. But it's also an unprecedented way to study the Earth itself. To be able to go around the world every 90 minutes means that you can start to measure the world as one functioning ecosystem, not just as little pockets all around, so that we can make global measurements and start to understand our entire planet. And of course, you can look at the universe without the atmosphere in the way. And on top of the space station, there's a huge experiment that's trying to determine the very nature of dark matter and dark energy itself. On the space station, we run about 200 experiments all the time, and they rotate and change on a regular basis. So it's not only our initial great international outpost in space and our stepping off point for the rest of the universe, but it's also a huge, thriving orbital research station, a laboratory that is unique in human construction. So yeah, it's an amazing place to be, and it's just our first step. You know, it's teaching us a lot about spaceship design and spaceship system support, so that we can start going confidently to orbit around the moon and build a research station on the moon to eventually be able to do the same thing further and further away from home.
If I remember well, you had the flu when you were up there. So what's harder, to have a flu here on Earth or have it up there in the space?
No, it's impossible to have the flu in space. There's no one to catch it from. The only way you could get the flu is if our quarantine systems failed and somehow somebody came on board who was sick, and we're really, really careful about that. So in fact, the entire world could get the flu, but the crew up on the space station would be perfectly isolated from them. You do, though, have some symptoms because of weightlessness that resemble the flu, just because there's no gravity to drain the fluid out of your head. It's like you're perpetually standing on your head up on board a spaceship. So, you know, if you stand in your head for a long time, your face sort of gets red and it swells up and your sinuses fill up and you get a headache. That's what it feels like for most of the time on board a spaceship. And so it feels a little bit like the flu, but otherwise it's a perfect quarantine. And it's another reason that we can study certain types of medical health and do research that we can't do on Earth.
We had the experiment with the Kelly brothers. One was up there in space, one was on the Earth. How important that experiment is for humankind today?
Oh, it's one more interesting data point. It's an unusual thing to have identical twin astronauts. They're the only identical twin astronauts that have ever been hired by any of the world space agencies. So why not take advantage of it and study what we can from them? But, you know, that's only one person on the spaceship and one person back on Earth. It's a pretty small scientific sample. It adds to the 550 or so, 540 people that have flown in space, but it's still brand new. Space flight is younger than I am. When Gagarin flew, I was alive already. So space flight's still a very new human adventure. And every little bit of scientific information we can get, the more we learn from it about the Earth's magnetic field, about what is natural climate change on Earth, what is human-made climate change, about the moon and the stars beyond, and also about ourselves. It's just a new way to study all those things simultaneously.
You went out there for a spacewalk, and I remember that you had a problem with temporary blindness, which made you a big problem. But when you put that experience and experience of a spacewalk in equation, how it feels to be out there and see what you have seen at that moment.
Yeah, when you go to the movies, astronauts go on spacewalks all the time, you know, and actually spacewalks are very dangerous and very physically demanding because the suit is heavily pressurized and resists every motion of every muscle in your body. But but they're also glorious. Like they're fantastic. You're out alone in the universe. So we only do them very rarely, and when we really have to. And we have a very strict choreography of the purpose of being there, and a long, long list of tasks that we have to do. But at the same time, you're just a person out there. You're another human being where you can hold on to a ship with just one hand and have your entire body float weightless inside your spacesuit. And in one glance, you can see all the world beside you. And then if you look the other way, you're surrounded in 3 dimensions by the universe. And your only link with the 7.5 billion people on Earth is the handrail that's in your one hand. And you really get a sense of where we are in time. We're starting to actually explore away from the cradle that gave birth to us. It's still in a very fledgling state, but starting to personally experience and therefore understand things beyond our world itself. And so you get a sense of that door opening when you're outside on a spacewalk, but you also see the world in a way you've never been able to see it before. Looking through the windows of the spaceship is impressive, but being outside, it's like sitting in an apartment building and looking out the window of an apartment building, or going a few meters over and hanging on the side of the apartment building. You're only a couple meters different in location, but the personal experience and the ability to understand it changes significantly from being outside. And spacewalks do all that simultaneously.
That's one thing is singing Go Canada, and the other one is a Space Oddity. And those two experiences are really amazing. But how you felt at that moment while you were honoring your country, and on the other side you were honoring something what is really popular here, like a music.
Uh, Yet there's so many people that you feel thankful to when you get to do something really unusual. You know, if you're an Olympic athlete, you obviously feel very thankful towards everybody who trained you and taught you and brought you to a level that is so hard to achieve. And as an astronaut, maybe it feels a little like that. You're constantly very aware of your parents and your teachers and the organization that made this new type of exploration possible. And while I was up there handing over command from the previous space station commander to me, um, they played a classic rendition of the national anthem, "O Canada," for me. One that we play in the hockey arenas when we play hockey in Canada, and it was a great feeling of recognition of where I'm from. It's a very international organization, and we're very careful to respect each other. But there's also a great quiet sense of pride of how you got to where you are, and the number of people that made that possible. And so that was a lovely moment. You're right. I'm also a musician myself, and I wrote and recorded an entire album of music late at night on board the spaceship when I was supposed to be asleep. I just used GarageBand on an iPad. I stuck the iPad up on the wall. I floated a microphone in front of me and wrote and recorded an entire album. And that album I've recently played it with symphonies all over in the United States and in Canada. Music is a great way to celebrate and understand the universe around us. Um, and then I also, as you mentioned, I played a version of David Bowie's Space Oddity. Bowie himself described it as perhaps the most poignant version of the song ever done, which is enormous praise. Um, And I was happy to be able to do that because I think it let people see the space station for what it actually is. It's a big laboratory, it's a research post, it's a big machine, but essentially it's a place where people work and live and explore. And music, I think, humanizes it and lets people in on the reality of it. And hundreds of thousands of people see the space station now in a way that they would never have seen it as a result of Bowie's genius and of me having a chance to perform that song up there.
I remember myself, and I know so many people all over the world who have spent the time waiting for yourself to post the pictures on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and to follow your travels and explorations up there. How different perspective is when you're looking on the earth and on the cities which are here extremely large and significant, but when you look from up there, they're just a flat surface with some lines on the top of the earth.
One of the things that may surprise people is when you're on board a spaceship and looking at the world is almost completely empty. You know, 3/4 of the world, or at least 70%, is water. And there's hardly any of us out on the water. And then the vast deserts of the world and the jungles and the huge, mostly unoccupied areas. There are very dense little areas of human population, but most of the world is quiet and dark. And the people that write about overcrowding, the people that normally write in the magazines and newspapers, they live in cities, so they think the world is crowded. But mostly that's just a localized bias. It's quite reassuring to see how much of the world is empty and untouched. But there still are 7.5 billion of us living in the world. It's the biggest number of humans that has ever existed, and that doesn't come for free. If everybody wants to breathe and eat and turn on the lights and drive a car and flush a toilet, I mean, all of that has to be absorbed somehow by the world. And so I think being on a spaceship puts it all into its actual perspective, a realistic assessment of the world itself, with nobody yelling at you on a news channel telling you what to think, but actually allowing you to patiently, 1,000 times around the world, see the reality of our planet. And it's why I've written books about it. I did a book of nothing but images of the world called You Are Here, because I want people to see the world for what it is and draw their own conclusions and start feeling a sense of both belonging and of responsibility and stewardship to be a member of the animal planet. And I think maybe that is one of the most important lessons that comes back from enabling spaceflight.
Let me ask you just a quick two questions. One is how you comment that two of your fellow astronauts, Marc Garneau and Julie Payette. Marc was a minister in Canadian government. Julie is a newly named Governor General of Canada. How you comment that, if we can say, astronauts are leading Canada at the moment?
I think it's important to recognize that the life of an astronaut is a life of service. It's similar to perhaps someone serving in the police or the military. The fundamental nature of your job is that it is extremely dangerous, and it will kill some of your peers, some of your compatriots, and it's going to take decades of work, and you won't be doing it for your own personal gain, but you'll be doing it on behalf of the space agency and the country that you belong to. And I think that mental attitude of service really seeps into you as an astronaut. And in Marc Garneau and Julie Payette's case, they're both now still continuing a life of public service. Marc, as you say, as the Minister of Transport for Canada, doing an excellent job, a very honorable man. And Julie Payette, who is a classmate of mine, who just recently accepted to be Canada's Governor General, our official head of state. And both of those jobs are very public, but they're also jobs that require a putting self second, of putting the job ahead of what you're doing, of trying to serve others and do good for the nature or the nation that nurtured you, rather than say just pursue the interests of your own. And so I'm very proud of them both. I commend them both, and I think the work that both of them are doing is good for Canada and good for the world.
And my last question is, where you see the future of space exploration? And are we at the door or at the step of some new big things in the future?
Very recently, several nations of the world have committed to going beyond Earth orbit. At the sort of the summit that went on in Australia a couple weeks ago, the United States and Russia signed agreements to build an orbiting deep space gateway around the moon. That will allow countries and corporations and even private organizations to get access to the surface of the moon and access beyond the Earth-Moon system. So that level of cooperation between the United States and Russia and other nations, I think it's really important, because there's a lot of places where those two nations are disagreeing really vehemently and destructively. So it's good to have, in amongst everything else, significant visible projects of cooperation amongst nations of the world. Our technology is getting better. There's a company called Planet that can now map the entire world, every piece of dirt on the world, down to 3-meter resolution every single day. And that information is available to everyone. And I think that level of self-awareness is very important, so that we can start to understand the actual health and functioning of our planet. And space allows us to do that, and I think it's going to continue to do that. Also, our technology has improved, so that it has allowed us to have access to space and exploration like we never have before. And it teaches us about the world. It gives us a more clear understanding of our own planet, but it also allows us to start looking beyond what were our previous horizons. So it's an interesting moment in space exploration and leaving away from the world. And the fact that we're doing it globally, the fact that it's an international space station and has been for the last essentially 25 years, I think lays the groundwork really well for the pattern with which we should and are exploring the rest of the solar system and the universe.